Welcome to the Emergency Management and Preparedness Inclusion of Persons with Disabilities webinars series. I'm Lewis Krause from the Pacific ADA Center, your moderator for this series. This series of webinars is brought to you by the Pacific ADA Center on behalf of the ADA National Network. The ADA National Network is made up of 10 regional centers that are federally funded to provide training, technical assistance, and other information as needed on the Americans with Disabilities Act. You can reach your regional ADA center by dialing 1-800-949-4232. As always, in our sessions, we have real-time captioning, and it's provided for this webinar. The caption screen can be accessed by choosing the CC icon in the meeting control bar at the bottom of the screen. To toggle the meeting control bar on permanently for this session, press the Alt key once and then press it a second time. Only the speakers will have audio. The audio for today's webinar is being broadcast through your computer. Make sure your speakers are turned on or your headphones are plugged in. You can adjust the sound by navigating to the audio settings on the bottom of the panel. You can adjust the sound by sliding the soundbar left or right in the audio tab. If you do not have sound capabilities on your computer or prefer to listen by phone, excuse me, you can dial 1-669-900-9128 or 1-646-558-8656 and use the webinar ID 155-545-130. Do note this is not a toll-free number. Also, this webinar is being recorded and will be able to be accessed on the adapresentations.org website in the archives section next week. This is the 7th year of this webinar series, which shares issues and promising practices in emergency management inclusive of people with disabilities and others with access and functional needs. The series topics cover emergency preparedness and disaster response, recovery and mitigation, as well as accessibility and reasonable accommodation issues under the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, the Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990, the ADA, and other relevant laws. Upcoming sessions are available at adapresentations.org under the Schedule tab in the Emergency Management section. These monthly webinars occur on the second Thursday of the month at 2:30 Eastern, 1:30 Central, 12:30 Mountain, and 11:30 a.m. Pacific time. And by being here, you are on the list to receive notices for future webinars in the series. Those notices go out 2 weeks before the next webinar and open the webinar to that registration. You can follow along on the webinar platform with the slides. If you are not using the webinar platform, you can download a copy of today's PowerPoint presentation at the adapresentations.org webpage in the Schedule section. At the conclusion of today's presentation, there will be an opportunity for everyone to ask questions. You may submit your questions using the chat area within the webinar platform, and the speakers and I will address them at the end of the session. So feel free to submit them as they come to your mind during the presentation. You can submit those questions in the chat area text box as shown on the screen, or press Alt-H and enter the text in the chat area if you are using keystrokes only. If you are listening by phone and not logged into the webinar, you may ask your questions by emailing them to adaTech@adapacific.org. That's ADATECH@adapacific.org. If you experience any technical difficulties during the webinar, send a private chat message to the host by typing in the chat window. You type your comment in the text box and enter. The key, if you're using keyboards, do Alt-H to access the chat box via the keyboard keys. Or you can email us at adatech@adapacific.org, or you can call us at 510-285-5600. Today's ADA National Network Learning Session is titled Inclusive Emergency Planning. Inclusive emergency planning isn't as scary and out of reach as it sometimes feels. Emergency managers from a city and a county today will join FEMA's Region 9 Disability Integration Specialist to discuss how they were able to build better plans and engage with the disability community to achieve whole community all hazards emergency plans. Today's speakers are Roxann Crawford, the Region 9 Disability Integration Specialist for the Federal Emergency Management Agency, or FEMA, and Vasquez, the Emergency Services Coordinator for the San Diego County Office of Emergency Services, and Jeremy Hynds, the Emergency Manager for the City of Henderson, Nevada. So I will now turn it over to you, Roxann. You want to start us off?
Absolutely. Good morning, West Coasters, and good afternoon to everyone else. Today, you could go to the next slide. We decided to go ahead and title this Inclusive Emergency Planning Doesn't Scare Me, because so often it can feel really overwhelming for emergency managers who are looking at their all hazards plans to feel comfortable and confident and not afraid to really kind of start to engage with the disability community and get in there and make their plans inclusive. And beyond the plans, engage with the disability community to ensure that they are working with people on plans for the same people rather than just planning by themselves for others. Next slide, please. So I have a very small role in today's presentation. I'm mostly kind of talking about my experiences in talking with different emergency managers and encouraging them to begin the process of including people with disabilities. So some of the things we talk about, why build an inclusive all hazards plan? Clearly, we have laws that require that individuals with disabilities be included in the plan, but I don't like to start there. I like to talk with emergency managers, talk with planners about why it's the right thing to do, because people matter. I mean, fundamentally, all people matter. Planning separately for people with disabilities rather than building a plan that includes people with disabilities really does leave room for failure. We talk a lot about annexes, and we talk about those annexes not only in trainings, but in real life situations and exercises. And I encourage people who have an annex as a part of their plan to really test it in an exercise and see if it serves all purposes that it should. And typically they find, that they need to do some additional planning at that point. Again, the law requires it, but more importantly, it's the right thing to do, and it matters to everyone. Next slide. Why include people with disabilities in the planning process? This is also kind of challenging. You don't know what you don't know. So it can be really difficult for an emergency manager who's looking at data, statistics, numbers, and what they know about the community, but maybe they haven't had an opportunity to truly engage with the disability community in particular. And so it's not a part of their kind of awareness in everyday life, right? So the motto, nothing about us without us, really stands strong here in this concept of planning for people with disabilities in emergency management. You don't know what you don't know, and who knows it better than the people who live it every day. But again, I caution in that same light that one person's experience isn't everyone's experience. It's important to engage with a number of different people, a number of people with different disabilities, because the experience is different for everyone, and to engage with organizations that serve individuals with disabilities. Consistent engagement builds and maintains trust, and it gives the opportunity for both groups to educate and work together before, during, and after disasters. I highlight that specifically because so often we in emergency management, in FEMA, city level, county level, everybody in emergency management, we tend to engage with the disability community for an exercise or for creating a plan or in a disaster when it matters, right? When it's big and we need it right then. But we don't have consistent engagement, and so we haven't built strong relationships. I have a motto that when you need a friend, it's too late to make one. It's far better to begin this process of building those relationships when there isn't a disaster, when you don't need anything, and you're engaging with them to say, you matter to me, this community matters to me, and I want to build a plan that is going to be inclusive of everyone. Next slide. Whole community. Participation of the whole community requires, again, consistent and active engagement and involvement in all aspects of planning. It's that consistency that matters. And it's not just engaging disability community partners to be victims in the exercise so we can practice rescuing them. They have a lot to offer in all ranges of planning and serve not just a key role in emergency planning and response and recovery, but also you can serve a role for them in providing information about preparedness and individuals getting more tools and resources and understanding of what they can do to protect themselves during emergencies. Conducting planning activities in an inclusive manner and providing accommodations needed for all partners to fully participate. It's important to let community partners know that you are willing and able to provide accommodations for them to participate in the planning process, to participate in exercises, and to be a part of the team. Accessible communication, including training and educational materials and planning and response opportunities. The messages that we're sending to our partners about exercises, about training, about planning, all of those need to be done in an inclusive and accessible manner so that people know that we're serious when we say we're planning and we want to include you. Next slide. I would, but. So this slide is important to me because these are the things that really are barriers for emergency managers when it comes to changing those all hazards plans to include people with disabilities. Emergency managers want to do the right thing. Nobody jumps into emergency management with a cold stone heart. Like, you're in emergency management because you care about people. They want to do the right thing, but sometimes they get stuck at that starting line. I don't know how to start. I know it's important, but it's overwhelming to me. I'm scared of it. I don't understand it. You know, as someone who presents fairly regularly about including people with disabilities in emergency planning, I know that sometimes we come across really strong because the message is important and it is strong. But we also need to do things like this that let people know that it is possible. It doesn't have to scare you. You can engage and you can be successful. I hear a lot, I don't have the funding to move forward. I just can't afford it. And I say to that, you can't afford not to. It's not a cost, it's an investment. But again, you can't make money appear from nowhere. But we've got some great people today who are going to talk to you about some of the creative things they did to make that a possibility. I don't know who to ask for help. Again, it can be really challenging to feel like you're out there by yourself and you don't know where to turn to and you don't know where to begin or who to talk to. And I can't commit resources that aren't for everyone else. We're going to address that on the next slide. So the next slide, this is a really common cartoon. I'm sure many of you have seen this cartoon, but I find this cartoon is the best way that I have to really kind of blow people's minds and encourage them to think about inclusion in a very different way, that universal design concept. So the cartoon has a janitor shoveling the stairs in front of a school. And the little word bubbles say there's a group of children standing waiting to go into the school. And there's a young man who uses a wheelchair also waiting to go into the school. And he asks the janitor, "Could you shovel the ramp, please?" The janitor says, "I will as soon as the steps are clear. A lot of kids want to go up." And the young man who uses the wheelchair says, "If you did the ramp, we could all use it." It really, really clearly highlights the fact that if we build with universal design and universal accessibility in mind, everyone can use it. If you can read English, you can read large print English, but not everyone can read the tiny, tiny print that we put on things all the time. This particular cartoon, I think, is the first step in changing the thought process for people who are building all hazards plans to start to come at this from a more inclusive, universal design concept. You don't need two plans. You need one plan that works for everyone. Is it the ramp that's extra or is it the stairs? Everyone can use the ramp, but not everyone can use the stairs. Next slide. I use this picture of, it's a picture of a room and it just kind of looks like any other room. There's a lot of people in the room. And I typically ask in a training, if I'm working with emergency managers, to tell me what they see that's special about this room. And the common answer is, it's just a room. I mean, maybe the ramp, I guess. So in the photo, there's a sloping ramp to the right side. There's a railing. There are people off to the left side sitting in chairs. And the space is just kind of a normal everyday space. But it's actually the Gallaudet Deaf Space, and it includes over 150 distinct architectural design elements in this one room that looks like nothing different. And those design elements address space and proximity, sensory reach, mobility and proximity, light and color, and acoustics. With the 5 major touch points between deaf experiences and the built environment, it features glass elevators, wide hallways, sliding entrance doors to allow people conversing in sign language to enter a building while maintaining conversation, sloping entrances to avoid tripping hazards associated with stairs, neutral colored walls, an abundance of windows and natural light, rounded corners, and unobstructed views. I use this picture to highlight the fact that you can't always see the things that have been built into the environment in a universal design mindset that change the experience for individuals who maybe have a different need for access. That you're not creating a space that needs 2 separate walkways or 2 different things. It's just another example of universal design making things accessible for everyone, but not limiting or changing the use for anyone else either. So with that in mind, I'm going to introduce our first other speaker, Jeremy Hynds. And Jeremy currently serves as the emergency manager for the city of Henderson, Nevada. Prior to accepting the position as the city emergency manager, he did emergency management training and exercise coordinator for the city of Henderson. He was the emergency management coordinator for the Nevada National Security Site, formerly the Nevada Test Site, where he coordinated and developed emergency management programs for chemical and nuclear high hazard facilities, and was the emergency planner and exercise coordinator for the state of West Virginia's Bureau for Public Health, Center for Threat Preparedness. Jeremy and I met maybe a little more than a year ago when I was out in Nevada, and he has really been exemplary in beginning the process of inclusive emergency planning. So you can skip the next slide because I already did it. Thank you.
Well, welcome everyone. Thank you all for being here. Thank you, Roxann, for that very kind introduction. I also want to thank the Pacific ADA for this opportunity. So I just wanted to touch on a couple of things before I get started into the presentation and really reiterate what Roxy said about people mattering. That's something that we talk about constantly in our service. The City of Henderson's emergency management falls under the fire service, but we aren't firefighters. That's just where we fall in our jurisdiction. And our fire department continually says this same thing, is that people matter. It is our mantra. And really what it comes down to, it's not about the plans. It's not about the process, the exercises, the training. Why are we all here and what are we doing for the people that we serve every single day? And it's to make the relationships between people whole when they go home at the end of the day. It's to reserve or make those relationships still available to people because we value people the most. And so that was kind of the impetus for us going down this road. About 2 years ago, we identified that we needed to update our emergency operations plan. It was due for revision, and there's only 3 people in our office, so it's very resource heavy to build a new EOP, or emergency operations plan. And due to the size of the project and the short timeline that we had, we chose to go with a contractor to assist us with developing this emergency operations plan. When we originally started going down this road, access and functional needs was not even in our purview. It wasn't something we were thinking about, and it wasn't something that we were actually planning for up to that point. So next slide, please. So as we started going through this process, we identified, well, where do we get the funding to get these plans going and actually hire the contractor? If you are a state or local agency, you will get EMPG funds, or Emergency Management Performance Grant funds. A lot of those funds are allocated different ways depending on where you are across the country. However, what we've done here is we allocated some of our EMPG funds towards building this new revision of our emergency operations plan. This allowed us to get a lot more perspective, not just our perspective within the city, but a lot more perspective because we had the resources of a contractor to help us go out. But we were still navigating the boat, if you will, on what actually goes into the plan. So we chose a contractor based on our request for proposal. And our initial request for proposal, again, did not include access and functional needs as something to add into our new EOP revision. So we started looking at what do we need for our new EOP revision and going through that planning process after we identified which contractor we were going to use. And it was the normal stuff. What kind of personnel do we need? Where are they going to be located? What do we need for our emergency support functions, checklists, all those normal things that emergency management look at to build their plan. Two of the things that we really are looking at was we are an EMAP accredited city, so we utilize EMAP standards. EMAP is the Emergency Management Accreditation Program, and within that program, jurisdictions, states, federal agencies, even local cities, and other private partners can get accredited in the emergency management. It's like the states or the jurisdictions accreditation program to be a good emergency management program. So we utilize that as kind of a baseline of what we needed to do within our plan. But as we were talking, it seemed to be that every time we would bring something up or some issue up, an access and functional needs question also was arising. And a lot of the time when we were going through this conversation was, well, we don't know. We don't know what we're going to do with those people. And we were in the same boat that Roxy had already laid out before, those questions. Where do we even start? Where do we get the funding to do all of these things that are saying that's going to be extra stuff to do? Who do we even start to ask down this road to get information to even, I don't know what somebody hard of hearing is going to need, or I don't know what somebody with ADA functional needs is going to need. So where do we start there? And can we commit all these resources for this very small population of what I thought we were looking at? And it was just very naive of me to think that way. And so as we started going through the planning process, we started identifying, when we were looking at all of our emergency support functions, from transportation to sheltering to public affairs, all of these different things started popping up to where we don't have a plan for this certain population, an access and functional needs population. Next slide, please. So what we did was we thought, well, we'll just build one annex to be a blanket annex throughout our whole emergency operations plan. And we quickly realized that that just wasn't going to do. We weren't going to be able to have a blanket AFN annex to cover all of the different aspects that we needed to identify. So we finally got to the point where we realized that this is a really big deal. And as some history, this isn't a new thing. Access and functional needs is not something that just started happening. It's been around forever. We just didn't realize in the city of Henderson that we needed to really address it until we started going through this process again. And so what we've done is, as we built out our EOP, we actually put an access and functional needs section in each of our emergency support functions annexes. So anybody sitting in, for example, the ESF1 transportation chair, they would be able to look at their access and functional needs section for that specific emergency support function, and they would have resources to draw from. Now, this was just very general, and it was just to get them to remember that this is something that we need to take into account when we start trying to get buses for people for evacuations, and to ensure that there are lifts on those buses for those populations. So it wouldn't be extra resources that we would call, it would just be buses that are equipped with lifts, and not buses that are just school buses to where we can't actually put those types of functional needs on the bus. Additionally, for public affairs, obviously we have to be 508 compliant and have American Sign Language interpreting and have closed captioning on those briefings that we provide. And that's just something we weren't thinking about. But these are the kinds of items that we started going through and identifying as we started planning through that process. What we also identified, and I know that this may not be the case for most jurisdictions on the phone, but what our city had done, totally outside of emergency management, was they had hired an ADA coordinator. And that ADA coordinator is really looking at inclusive building, but also I saw him as an opportunity, and I actually took him and asked him to be a part of our emergency operations center when we activate our EOC. And he actually has a seat, just like any other emergency support function in our EOC. We have him dedicated access and functional needs coordinator to be in here at any given time. And what he would be is kind of like a safety officer for access and functional needs. He would be roaming around our EOC, keying into certain conversations, working with our public affairs folks, working with our operations folks, working with our sheltering folks. And with that, he can have that advocacy that was lacking in our planning process, but in real time. And so that is our big push on what we have looked at as far as including access and functional needs within our space. Next slide, please. So, like I said, access and functional needs is not an old issue. It's not emerging. It's just an issue that is getting more attention in my eyes, because now I realize that this is not something that we have to pass by. We can include people just like anything else within our planning process. We just have to build relationships and maintain relationships. The biggest challenge that I still face is I don't know what I don't know, just like most of you on the phone call here. And this is the first step to understand what you don't know. Access and functional needs, language, resources, all of these become a challenge for us. But don't worry, there are resources out there. Make sure that you are checking with your local social services for resources. Make sure that you're looking for your state within their health departments for their resources. Call Roxann for her resources. And also the Pacific ADA with their resources. So there are, I just gave you 4 very viable resources to start keying in on, to start including into your plan. Next slide, please. And so what I want to nail home is that this is not something that you want to wait for to do during an incident. We always talk about this in the planning process, that we want to plan so we're not planning when something goes down. So there's a lot of different nuances when it comes to pre-positioning certain things or getting ahead of inclusion in building certain things. You've got to get ahead of that now, because come time that you actually have something go off, we're not going to be in the right space, and we're not going to be ready for that to actually happen. So I would say don't wait. This is a mitigation effort. You will save money in the long run, and you will save lives in the long run. And that's, again, why we're all here. And one of the last things I wanted to leave you with is why we do this is because people matter. But how we do this is we do it including 4 different things. 1, we standardize. And what we do is we standardize a process. That's what we've put in our plan. We have a standardized process in our plan. Then we are accountable. We hold each other accountable by having it in our plan, and we test that plan. And then we provide each other with feedback. Then we're consistent. We consistently apply that standard that we wrote in the plan. And then lastly, we are coordinated. We are better together than we are apart, and including the position as part of the team instead of something that's just thought of afterwards is where we need to be as a coordinated agency. So thank you again, and I look forward to your questions at the end of the webinar.
Thanks, Jeremy. All right, everybody. If you want to go to the next slide, Lewis. I'm going to call on Dan Vasquez, and I'm going to let Dan introduce himself. Dan?
Hey, everybody. Dan Vasquez with the County of San Diego's Office of Emergency Services. Hope everyone's doing well. I kept the slide content brief so that I can go ahead and read from the slides for those that are auditory learners or those that have varying levels of vision. So on the left-hand side, it says County OES with 3 bullet points: alert and warning, AFN coordinator, and CERT. And on the right column is city lifeguards, EMT, beach officer, swiftwater rescue, dive recovery. So I've been with OES going on about 3 years now, and my top 3 priority projects currently are alert and warning, specifically helping out with the Accessible Alert San Diego portion of it, which gives opted-in users to our kind of reverse 911 system platform. It gives them a link, and the link has an American Sign Language video. It also has voiceover, and it has text captioning as well. And then we also have Spanish alerting currently. Another piece is I am our office's AFN coordinator. So, and we'll get into the details on that towards the end of my presentation, and as well as CERT, which we'll discuss in a little bit as well. So before OES, while going to school, I worked for City Lifeguards here locally. And I was an EMT. I also worked as a beach officer after going through a post academy. And I was a part of the swiftwater rescue and dive recovery teams where we got activated more often than I'd like. So next slide, please. So a few topics I'd like to discuss. One is building better plans. There's 4 points to that. One is lawsuits, gap analysis, the EOP, which is the Emergency Operations Plan, and also the crosswalk. Another topic is engaging with the community. So I want to discuss partner relay, our access and functional needs working group, the access and functional needs symposium, the neighborhood evacuation team, which is the NET, and then also a few resources. Next slide, please. So some lawsuits, and you may be familiar with a few of these. So there was, you have the CF-ILC v. Oakland, and one of the findings in that is, quote, not prepared to meet the needs of people with disabilities during an emergency. We had another one, the CALIF et al. V. Los Angeles, quote unquote, discriminated by not addressing the needs of people with disabilities in the context of their emergency plans. And another one, BCID et al. V. Bloomberg, quote unquote, in planning for and responding to emergencies and disasters has not adequately addressed the needs of people with disabilities. We in San Diego decided, hey, we need to learn from others' mistakes and put our best foot forward in how we address the findings in all of these lawsuits. They might not have been the most expensive, but they were quite lengthy. Each one of those was about 3 years of a process. And a lot of the findings repeated the same information over and over. And it's that the planning wasn't adequate for inclusion with all people, including people with disabilities or other access and functional needs. Next slide, please. So we decided to put out some work to a contractor. So we were awarded some UOSI funding, about $100,000. And the statement of work consisted of having a review, crosswalk, and gap analysis for up to 25 plants, to conduct training to ensure understanding of planning and response principles, to report a report to contain recommended corrective actions and recommended implementation steps, and to conduct presentation of findings and recommendations. So we did this in about 2015, and it was an 11-month process. And 25 plans, we ended up getting away with submitting 88 documents, 8 videos, and 2 websites. And that was because so many of our plans were had many annexes or ESFs attached to them. And so we were able to kind of give this to BCFS Health and Human Services, which was the contractee. And what they did was be able to provide us with all of the nuts and bolts of what we were missing, and then educate us as to what that really meant, and gave us a plan for implementation. So, $100,000 in UOSI grant funding, that's not a lot of money. It's something that is attainable and it won't break the bank, but you know what, maybe it's not in your budget and maybe you don't have access to UOSI funds. Well, maybe talk as a region with wherever you are, maybe get a collaborative effort with different cities or different counties or parishes or neighborhoods to come together to kind of find the financial solution to this. Another piece is, do you have interns? Maybe there's some master's degree students looking for a thesis. We highly recommend utilizing kind of, not necessarily free labor, but contact these local universities, identify your needs, and let volunteers fill that gap for you. So we're hoping that you'll be able to utilize kind of what I explain here and research kind of the framework and the statements of work of what's needed and be able to fill those gaps more or less on a budget. Next slide, please. So one of the biggest pieces they looked at was our emergency operations plan, the EOP. So they were going to indicate the gap found, the page it is found on, recommendations for correction, and the gap type. The gap types were public information, communication notification, transportation, evacuation, language, people first, inclusionary integration, maintain independence, maintain health, physical access, resource gaps, and other. So I'm going to focus in on the EOP because it was the biggest plan that we had them look at. So 10 out of our 16 annexes were really scrutinized and honed in on. And then all of those 10 bulleted items that I just spoke about were kind of broken down even further into subcategories and taken apart. So you can take these gap types, apply them to your own plans, create objectives, outline what you want your interns or student workers, or maybe your statement of work that you submit for grant funding, of the things that you're going to look for through your plans to ensure that they're more inclusive. Next slide, please. So another piece of it was the crosswalk. So on the screen is a colorful kind of spreadsheet. So on the left side, it's labeled from A through J, and those are kind of just those, let's say those are our annexes. And then on the top, from left to right, is labeled 1 through 8. And so let's say that's 8 of the 10 categories, and they're all color coded. So how does the crosswalk make things easier? So what we did was we identified our biggest threat. So let's say that's section 5, right? The blue cells. So we noticed that a lot of areas across the board of all of our plans are missing a specific type of information. So by honing in on this, it's going to make the largest impact because the efforts needed to get approved language into one plan can now be applied across the board into many different areas. So rather than have to do one plan at a time, we focused in on subject areas that we were lacking and built upon that to blanket it through the different plans. So for example, let's say that section 1 is people first language. Well, only one plan is missing that, right? J. So maybe that's not something that we put immediate energy towards because it's a quick fix, but it's not as impactful towards our plans currently as, let's say, section 5, where 9 out of 10 plans have this gap. Maybe let's call it public information, something not very easy to tackle, but because it's so expansive through our planning, it's going to have the greatest payoff and accomplished feeling, if you will, by taking on that gap initially. Next slide, please. So engaging in the community. So partner relay. On the slide, there's some bullet points. It says 9 languages, trusted community leaders, disseminate emergency information to followers, various cultures, various religions, and lastly, primarily immigrant and refugee communities. So we identified here in San Diego that certain populations that have either uprooted to our area by choice or by need for that matter, they may not have a whole lot of trust in big government. So what we did is we pulled together community members who they did trust. And that could be the religious leaders, cultural leaders in their area that have a larger following, people that they trust, that they talk to for how to get around town, where to go for more information, and that sort of thing. So what we do is when we send out public messaging, specifically for emergencies or disasters, we also make sure that we give that to the partner relay. And we ask them to translate this into their language and push that out to their followers so that we're being inclusive to the varying cultures and languages that are in our area. Next slide, please. In San Diego, we have an access and functional needs working group. So on the slides, it says bullet point, more than 40 members and growing, community-based orgs, nonprofit orgs, government, meet quarterly, address concerns from various organizations, review new plans and policies, and work to educate and learn about or from one another. So we actually used the working group to write kind or approve or vet the language that was developed to close the gaps that were found in the analysis that we used the crosswalk for. So, and while they're not editing plans kind of all the time, we're educating each other. So we're discussing ongoing projects and mission statements so that if there's some overlap between one access and functional need organization and they're doing the same thing as someone else, we can reduce the duplicative work by tying them together and partnering and having that collaborative piece. So whether it be presentations, workshops, exercises, the list goes on. By bringing together these subject matter experts, if you will, in their varying fields, we're able to really hone in on reducing that red slice of the things that we don't know. So how do we find people for a working group like this? It grows pretty quickly. So you can start by just researching some varying disabilities, whether it's vision, auditory, behavioral, emotional, other physical, and Google them in your area and see what nonprofits exist and invite them to the table, and then talk to them, see who else they know of would benefit from being a part of this, and have them invite more people. And pretty soon you're going to have a large working group of community members, nonprofit organizations, community-based organizations that are coming together to educate one another and really close in on those gaps. Next slide, please. Something else that was UOSC grant funded, we have our Access and Functional Needs Symposium. So 30,000 in UOSC grant funded for about 200 attendees. The panelists are going to include fire chiefs, police chiefs, emergency managers, and our access and functional needs partners. And the topics going to be discussed are communication, evacuation, transportation, and sheltering. So the goals behind this are really twofold. So we're going to more or less boast about how good we are about planning and being inclusive when it comes to communication, evacuation, transportation, and sheltering for those group members that may be unaware of what we've been up to. So kind of that educational piece for our access and functional needs partners. But also, we're going to hear from our other access and functional needs partners that are invited to be attendees to ensure that we're not missing varying disabilities or varying access needs when it comes to our planning. So it's more or less going to be a live forum for a gap analysis, which is now the educational piece for our emergency managers and first responder community. Next slide, please. Then we have the neighborhood evacuation team. And actually, I saw a few of the attendees on here. Looks like some people that I've worked with in building this. So I thank you guys. The dot points on here is existing community emergency response teams, that's the CERT members, one-on-one community partnership for people who may have difficulty evacuating. They're going to focus on preparedness plan, alert and warning systems, and evacuation plan, and remove big government and empower communities to be more resilient. So this kind of started as a brainstorm about a year ago. California tragically saw how destructive fires were 2017, 2018, not just by acre, not just by home, but the demographic of older adults, people with disabilities, other access needs that weren't able to evacuate. So we recognize the gap, and the gap that we see is the personal responsibility of communities to be more resilient. The goal is to empower these communities to be more resilient, have them take responsibility and ownership of their neighborhoods. San Diego has about 3.5 million people on any given day. Approximately only about a third of 1% are first responders. And we all like vacation, we get sick, we aren't all on call 24/7. So at any given time, we have about one first responder for about 1,000 people. And that's a terrifying reality, but it's not just a local problem. It's nationally that ratio, 1 to 1,000. So rather than trying to rely on a first responder to save 1,000 people by themselves, we took trained volunteers who want to help and we gave them an outlet. So these community emergency response team members who are already known in their communities for volunteering and being active, we're setting them up to kind of have these conversations with people who are identifying themselves as, hey, I want a little extra help in planning for an emergency. They're going to go front to back on a preparedness plan. They're going to, in detail, discuss what the alert and warning systems are in place and what to do if they receive certain warnings, and also really hone in on an evacuation plan. What specific needs do these individuals have that they need to plan for during that evacuation piece? Next slide, please. And lastly, the resources. So San Diego has a few resources that I'd like to offer all of you. So one is our shelter training videos. So we have 3 videos, one that trains up shelter workers on kind of working with people that have varying physical disabilities. We have a video on cognitive disabilities, one on emotional disabilities, and they each have kind of an instructor manual and participant manual with those so that you can train up shelter workers and shelter managers and staff on the varying demographic that would potentially be coming to your shelters. And then we also have first responder training videos. So these are helpful information to consider when evacuating individuals with varying physical, cognitive, and emotional disabilities. And we've got 8 videos currently. It's about 8 to 10 minutes each. And there are links on the slide. Both of those can be found at readysandiego.org /training. And then you can find those there. And the last thing is there's an article. It's one of my favorite articles. And it's by June Kales and Alexandra Enders. It's Moving Beyond Special Needs, a function-based framework for emergency management and planning. Now, this is really honing in on making planning for people with access and functional needs and others disabilities kind of completely inclusive. Just like what Jeremy was saying about not having an annex, just like what Roxy was saying about the cartoon when it comes to having separate items for people to utilize. There's a quote from that article. It's, "As long as disability and other special needs groups are viewed as unique or special, the system's existing inefficiencies will continue." So that is it. They have to be a part of every piece, and we're definitely not here to make this difficult. So if by any means you need help with anything, please reach out. Take the time and learn, be inclusive, and don't let it scare you. So thank you.
All right, Roxy, are we done?
Hey, this is Roxy again. Sorry, I was trying to get off mute. So that's basically the information from all 3 of us. I know that I saw some questions coming up off to the side. Is it a good time to answer some of those questions, or?
Yes. Okay. If you guys are done presenting, then we'll go ahead. Thank you so much, Roxy and Dan and Jeremy. That was a really great presentation. And so for all of you who are listening, if you want to submit your questions, this is the time to do that in the chat window, and we'll take them right now. Okay, so the first question is one, we'll see if you guys have an answer, otherwise I will chime in. Not all ADA coordinators are good, or they tend to focus on one type of disability. Not all access and functional needs. How do we know the ADA coordinator is qualified? And if you'd prefer, I can deal with that, or if you have an answer, you can.
This is Jeremy with the City of Henderson. I'll take the first part of that question and I'll defer the qualification to you. As far as what we're using our ADA coordinator, and I agree, a lot of ADA coordinators that I've talked to do have a very linear idea of what they need to do. So the best way to combat that, at least for us, is that I have engaged my ADA coordinator and opened their eyes to the broader world of access and functional needs. And I have committed our office and our funds to provide them with any information, training, or travel to go to any of those trainings and get more educated on the broader AFN network, to engage him more and to give him more knowledge in his current capacity as the AFN coordinator in our EOC.
And in addition, this is Roxy. In addition, Jeremy and other emergency managers that we've spoken with who do utilize their ADA coordinators in the Emergency Operations Center have been working towards engaging with the whole community and partnering ADA coordinators with the whole community. So the opportunity to have that individual as a representative in the Emergency Operations Center to provide training, funding for training, broaden knowledge, and providing them with the all hazards plan and their understanding of the expectations of them within the Emergency Operations Center. I think having this really comprehensive all hazards plan, which includes access and functional needs all within the plan, and having the individual who's representing people with disabilities as a subject matter expert in the Emergency Operations Center, having them have access to the plan pre-disaster helps to expand that role, the descriptions of the role, the identified responsibilities of that role, so that they're able to provide that service. And I think that they've done a really good job of making sure that that plan is accessible here. I can't say that that's the same everywhere, but again, you know, good first steps, and then we continue to learn more about what we don't know. Lewis, did you have more to add?
Yeah, let me tell you a little bit about ADA coordinators and the qualifications. There are no specific qualifications for an ADA coordinator. That's a downside. There are some groups that are attempting to create a certificate for ADA coordinators, so that is in its beginning stages. You'll see that starting maybe happening more and more over time. But I think, as Roxy was talking about, what you really want to have is you really want that person or the role to be somebody who represents what the knowledge about disability that is required for you in your work, as well as for the jurisdiction, because the ADA coordinator is really a function of what the ADA lays out for a jurisdiction to have in place. Some jurisdictions are better than others in finding somebody who is very capable for that role. So you may be running into some of that. And that's kind of the last I'll say, other than in April, we will have a presentation about some of our research here, which looked at ADA coordinators in emergencies, emergency operations and whatnot. And so we'll see what they, the results of those will be, and there may be some interesting things to learn from that. All right, next question. Unless Dan, did you have anything to add to that? Sorry.
I would just say that in our Emergency Operations Center, we have someone titled an AFN Technical Advisor, and their job isn't to be the subject matter expert by any means. However, their job is to ask the hard questions and to just know where to go to find the answer. So they're more of a coordinator piece to say, okay, this is the issue at hand. Let me connect you with the correct person that is the subject matter expert.
Great, thanks. All right, next question. What do communities do that have financial inabilities or difficulties to get prepared?
So, hey, it's Dan, and I just want to kind of reiterate on the use of interns or student workers to kind of for the planning piece, right? So in emergency management, we never like to reinvent the wheel. We like to copy and borrow from one another and edit it to our jurisdiction's specific needs and put our kind of stamp of approval on it for us. So I think that as long as you use each other as a resource, it doesn't have to break the bank and become super expensive. You don't have to go out and get a contractor, but maybe it's easier. That's just an option.
And this is Jeremy from the city of Henderson. I would echo that same sentiment and also add, it doesn't cost you any money to go out and talk to these folks, and you'd be surprised how much they are willing to help you with this planning process for free.
All right, next question. What involvement did or do any of you have, if any, from your local VOAD, the voluntary organizations active in disaster?
This is Roxy. I know that this question is more geared towards Dan and Jeremy, but Jeremy and I have just participated in a 2-day long summit here in Nevada, emergency preparedness summit, and there were a number of presenters, and one of the sessions that I was able to sit in on was a VOAD presentation, and I learned a lot about how active the VOAD is here in Nevada, specifically that they have a northern and a southern branch. So I know, speaking from just what I've learned yesterday, that the VOADs play a really, really important role. But I defer over to Dan also for the perspective from California, though I work in California mostly.
So yeah, we've got great partnership with our voluntary organizations that are active in disaster. It's one of our other coordinators' areas of expertise, so I can't speak much to it other than we do work with them quite closely.
Next question. First, the person wants to know the contact information for the FEMA Disability Integration Specialist for Virginia. They've been having trouble finding a contact list. So, Roxy, if you have an idea for where they can find that, if you can put that, maybe you can type that into the chat window. And then the next question is, do you have any tips specific to inclusive school crisis planning? For example, how to ensure students with or without disabilities are able to exit a building in a timely manner?
This is Jeremy from the city of Henderson. It's a great question. It's really not going to change as far as where you're going to be pulling your resources from or how you're going to plan. Luckily, we have our own school district, and they are working with the schools to work on access to functional needs and how to do exactly that. So I don't want to assume that I know the answer to that, but I can tell you that my interaction with them is not any different than me talking about evacuating with the same type of equipment and the same type of planning as we would anything else outside of a school.
Dan, anything to add?
Nope, nothing on my end.
Okay. Next question. Before I tell you about the questions, there have been quite a few notes, and you can see them in the chat windows about the Getting It Wrong report that we had here discussed in, I believe it was last August. So if you would like to know about that report and the community based review of after actions of several disasters from the 2017 year, that might be useful for you as well in putting together your work. Let's see, is there a specific training for ADA integration specialist?
Lewis, is that a question for you if you're speaking specifically about ADA integration, or is that geared to me?
I don't know if anybody, I don't know if you guys have an answer, you can go for it first. I think one of you must have said an ADA integration specialist, and maybe somebody's reacting to that.
I'm not sure. I don't recall that language being used. This is Roxy, sorry. I get a number of requests for people wanting to know how they can become qualified or certified, or what types of training would assist them in getting a job with FEMA as a disability integration specialist. And that's a really challenging kind of question. There are certification and qualification programs within FEMA, but you start to enter those processes after you've been hired. So you would be considered a disability integration trainee, and then you would work towards qualification. And that's beyond just classes. It involves a lot of actual on the ground experience and working with fully qualified disability integration specialists who act in a mentorship role, who act in a coach advisory role, and who really help kind of guide you through the process. Because on the FEMA side specifically, it's challenging because you're working within two worlds. So you are a FEMA employee and you have to understand the federal assistance programs and you have to understand the FEMA perspective on things. Then you also need to work within the community and have a good and clear understanding of disability integration, and you have to educate FEMA on those things. So so the challenging answer is that no, there really isn't a class, but gaining information, education, and awareness on emergency management goes a really long way. And taking as many trainings and classes as you can related to disability community integration, understanding, and etiquette also go a long way. So kind of a not answer.
And let me add a little bit to this, because there is no phrase for in the ADA world of ADA integration specialist. I mean, we talked a little bit about ADA coordinator, and that's the usual term. It could be that you're also hearing disability integration specialist, which is what Roxy was just referring to, or what, and really what Roxy and her colleagues around the country from FEMA are charged with. So that could be also what we're talking about here. Next questions coming up. Well, first, some people are referring to other kinds of resources for people to be aware of about disability rights centers that can provide resources related to implementing the ADA requirements for emergency management. And then here's our next question. How is the word getting out to people with disabilities to be able to engage in conversations, discussions, planning for emergency planning? Maybe let's ask it specifically for the two of you. How do you get the word out to people with disabilities to engage in your planning process?
So it's Dan over in San Diego. So what we do is I actually have one of my interns spend actually most of her time working on researching different organizations that are local to the area. And she, just finds them online through Google, and she calls and she finds a person to talk to and discusses what services they provide. And she finds out which way their recipients of service receive information well. Do they want it email? Do they want large print? Do they want a video? And kind of what we do is we take all of this and we document it, and then we invite these people to sit at the table with us so that we're being inclusive to their recipients' needs as well.
Jeremy Hynds from the city of Henderson. What I'll be doing, and I'll be perfectly honest with the group here, is that we are pretty much in an incipient stage with our planning efforts. We have taken our first chunk of getting this train going, but we are definitely not as far as advanced as the city of San Diego is concerned. So what we're doing to start that conversation and start taking the small chunks out of the elephant is we're going to start with our county social services folks and start utilizing their resources as a guide to start reaching out to those individual agencies that they have listed on there that we can use.
This is Roxy. I'm just going to add to Jeremy's here. We did some work about a year ago, and the guide that he's speaking of here in Nevada is really comprehensive. They have listed contacts and individuals for literally every single disability related organization in the state of Nevada. And so I know that that's not an option for everywhere and that not everywhere has that guide, but I think, I just want to highlight that the guide that Jeremy's speaking about here is really well done.
Next question. What are some specific examples of gaps in evacuation plans that failed to address AFM, and what are some ways to mitigate these gaps?
This is Jeremy from the city of Henderson. one of the ones that we have identified is actually here where I work at City Hall in the city of Henderson. We didn't have any opportunity for users of wheelchairs to get downstairs and fire exits. And so that's obviously a very large issue. So just one of the many different examples is that we put fire chairs or evacuation chairs in each one of those halls on each level of the building.
Dan, anything?
Just that one of the gaps that we identified was that there's just not enough resources in a fast-moving event that's not planned, such as a wildfire. And so by engaging the community to really take ownership and to assist in that planning piece, specifically for evacuation for people that have varying needs, was definitely key to us kind of trying to close that gap.
Next question, and this one's to you, Dan. Can Dan talk about how the partner relay program ties into San Diego's emergency notification system?
Yeah, so we actually, our local program, which is just kind of a similar line of reverse 911 system, we call it Alert San Diego. After we push out a notification to any community, we also relay that information via an app called Slack to our partner relay members. And there's a few hundred members on that. And so then we ask them to translate the message that we pushed out in English and in Spanish into their respective languages, and then to pass that along to their constituents by any means that they have, whether it's email, phone call, etc.
All right, next question. Well, a few people wanted to throw in some ideas about, there's quite a few resources that people are throwing up in the chat window, so do read some of those. And then also there were some ideas for including people with disabilities, including ones like, if you feed them, they will come to a meeting, seminar, planning session. And also that people with disabilities should be compensated for their expertise in this person's opinion. Due to poverty restrictions, it's thoughtful to be prepared with gift cards and covering transportation costs. It's also important to provide remote options for participating, like Zoom. So unless you guys want to react to that, I'm gonna go on. A lot of resources here. Have you attempted to identify resources by working with your local 211?
Jeremy,
This is, oh, go ahead, Jeremy.
Sorry. No, you go ahead, Dan.
I was going to say is that, yeah, we actually pulled, that was our preliminary data set, was a lot of the different partners that are on, that partner with 211, because we have that here in San Diego as well.
Now I don't have to talk.
Okay. The person who asked for the FEMA Disability Integration Specialist, that is listed there. Jeremy and Roxy threw that into the chat box, but it's under FEMA Region 3 Disability Integration Specialist. Okay. Oh, well, we're getting lots of resources here.
Awesome. I love seeing all the resources.
Yeah.
These are, I mean, this is Roxy. In my opinion, because this is saved and because people can come back and look at this, you know, my plan has always been, we invited lots of emergency managers to attend this presentation, and I plan on sending the link to a lot of emergency managers. So the resources are really helpful because they give tools that people can use to get started and lots of good ideas. So thank you for those.
All right, and we have another question here. What happens when cell lines go down? And this might be, well, you can both take it, but this might be back to what Dan was talking about the connection to the community or to the phone line. But anyway.
So this is Dan, and I'm also our alert and warning coordinator. So, and we kind of go along FEMA guidelines as well as state of California guidelines, in that being multimodal is a best practice. So not strictly relying on communications that rely on cell towers, but also doing things such as social media posts. We have, emergency alert system, which goes over radio and television. So kind of giving the multifaceted approach, especially in a situation where one device might not be able to get certain messages.
And Jeremy from the city of Henderson, to add on to that, what we try to do, and I know this is probably a lot more difficult than I'm making it seem, but we try to have a high-tech, low-tech, and no-tech solution for all of these different types of things that we try to do. So keep that in mind as you're going through the planning process for all these different things. Not outside of AFN, this is something that we try to stay on our mantra to keep those kinds of ideas when we're looking for backups to backups.
And another question here, there's a couple of questions related to this. So I think we've answered another question was asking about backup plans for notification when cells go down. And you can answer that as well in this, along with this next question. Does your agency use IPAWS, the IPAWS, for sending out alerts, and why or why not?
City of Henderson, yes, we do.
Likewise with San Diego.
And the reason why is because it will reach the most amount of people. Our reverse 911 system only hits lined phones. So this is very limited, and it's only for people who sign up to get those calls. So it's even more limited by people, one, knowing that the service exists, and two, having a line phone, and three, actually signing up to do it. So the IPAWS system allows us to force a message to not only line phones, but as well as cell phones and other forms of mediums such as radio and television.
Somebody's adding in there also, don't forget ham radio options for communications, including simplex and Echolink. So I have a question. So for each of you, okay, so you've done this. So now do you have any next steps or next topics to tackle? How are you going to move forward from what you've done?
So I will start, being the newest to this process, City of Henderson. What we're going to be tackling next is I plan on engaging my ADA coordinator more, continuing to educate ourselves more, and continuing to reach out to the county and those resources identified that we already spoke about, and beginning to really engage those access and functional needs populations and advocates around our valley. And with that information, I can start building the framework to more robust inclusion into our emergency operations plan during our next revision.
Thanks. Dan?
One of the things we're going to work on this year is expanding kind of the languages for alert and warning by utilizing partner relay, our access and functional needs working group. Ideally, we'll have kind of a preset messaging in various languages dependent on disasters, so that we can move towards having more than just Spanish and English currently.
Okay. Oh, wow. Somebody has dropped a huge thing in here.
Nice.
So it's about the activists with the Disability Culture Club. People can look at that if you want, and it's actually a great lead-in to which I'll tell you about now because I was going to tell you later, but the next webinar next month will be about the shutoffs in California and what the local independent living centers took on to try to deal with using that as a planning tool. So let's see. This message is so big. Oh, there's more message. Somebody asked about the iPause. Maybe before you answer this, before people leave, I want to let you know that if you are in the process of putting together your plans, these webinars that we have been hosting here that you can find in the archive, there's 5 years worth of them. They have gone over many of these kinds of issues and resources over the years. Do look at those at adapresentations.org in the archive section of emergency management. You will find topics where people cover a lot of these in a way that will really be helpful to you. So now the question was, why can't iPause be used more often?
Dan, do you want to go first?
Yeah, so the way alert and warning works is kind of there's varying levels on how many people it can reach out to. And when emergency managers are pushing out these alerts, we want to be as specific as possible to the affected population, right? So if there's something occurring in a small northern section of your region, it's best to send it out to that potentially impacted northern region rather than send it out to your entire county or city. So if you're looking at potential impact of 5,000 people, sending it to 3.5 million people is kind of not exactly what we want to do. And before recently, iPause was one of those very large blankets that's going everywhere, such as the wireless emergency alert or the emergency alert system. So at the end of December of last year, iPause actually incorporated new WIA 2.0 and 3.0 upgrades, which are really still in their infancy stages. And so I would promise that even in a lot of areas, soon you're going to start seeing a lot more use of iPause as those kind of kinks get worked out at the local and state levels.
Jeremy from the city of Henderson. I would also add that the reason why we don't use this kind of as like a keep people informed type thing is it's not intended for that. It's intended for potential, immediate, or right now information. And if we continue to utilize it as more of, hey, just this is what's going on, we kind of become that boy who cried wolf. And how important is that message that's going to come through after you've seen the message 30 or 40 times? So it's really utilized in instances that are of immediate nature, and FEMA does frown upon utilizing it as a messaging system instead of what was it intended for.
All right, I'm gonna move us forward. Realize that many of you may still have questions for our speakers, and apologize if you did not get the chance to ask your question. Roxy, actually, before I proceed, do you want to say anything about what you can offer to emergency managers if they would like?
Well, this is Roxy. I am always happy to provide contacts and to help in building relationships, in explaining. I was here with Jeremy and the contractor one day when they were redoing the plan, just reviewing different things and encouraging them to reach out to disability partners in the community, talking about the position in the Emergency Operations Center and the importance of having someone whose focus was on those things. It's a little bit challenging because I know that people tune in nationwide, and myself, I am FEMA's Region 9, so I am limited in scope to California, Arizona, Nevada, Hawaii, and the Pacific Territories. But I encourage anyone to reach out to me. I'll put my email address in the chat window, and I can definitely help provide you with contact for your regional disability integration specialist, or if you're in a region that doesn't currently have one, I can connect you with individuals who can serve in that connection role. I encourage, again, anyone to reach out to me with any questions, and if I'm not able to answer them, I will definitely pass you on to someone who can, or provide you contacts and additional information. Thank you so much.
And also, I will add to that about the ADA centers. You can certainly call any of the ADA centers by dialing 1-800-949-4232 and ask any question related to the Americans with Disabilities Act, and we can answer those questions for you. So thanks for being here. You'll receive an email with a link for an online session evaluation. Please complete that evaluation for today's program, as we value your input and want to demonstrate the importance to our funder. We want to thank our speakers today for sharing their time and knowledge with us. Thank you all, Jeremy and Roxy and Dan. And a reminder again that the session was recorded. It will be available for viewing next week at adapresentations.org in the archive section of emergency management. Like I said before, on our next webinar on March 12th, we'll be joined by representatives of the California Independent Living Centers for a presentation on using the California power outages for inclusive emergency planning. We hope you can join us. Watch your email 2 weeks ahead for the announcement of the opening of the registration for that webinar. Thank you for attending today's session, everyone, and have a good rest of your day. Bye-bye.
Thanks, bye.